Hi, and welcome to our interview series. My name is Leanne Mallory. I'm the founder and CEO of Leading in Motion, where we specialize in helping business leaders connect with the wisdom of their bodies so that they and their companies can thrive. In just a moment, we'll begin our next expert interview, but just a few words first on why we're here. So this interview is part of a larger project called the Corporate Dance Mavens, supporting dancers and dance teachers of all kinds to break into the corporate market. Our goal is to help you figure out how to do the difficult and rewarding work of teaching dance in the business context. Whether you're currently teaching dance in companies or you see yourself as a total novice, whether you're an internal trainer or an external consultant or service provider to be, our aim is that this program helps you take your work to the next level. So we're going to be interviewing today Jenny Sauer-Klein. Jenny is the founder of a new organization called Play on Purpose. She currently specializes in getting folks in suits out of their chairs and engaging with their values through the art of play in real time. Prior to doing this work, Jenny was one of the co-founders of the Acro Yoga Global Movement. She's been dancing since the age of 5 and teaching embodied ways of engaging since about the past 15 years. Jenny, welcome, and we'd love to hear what you'd love to say about yourself to us.
Yeah, thanks, Leanne. It's awesome to be here. It's always fun to hear about yourself and be like, oh, that sounds good. I like the way that sounds. Yeah, the big piece for me too has been, not only play and embodiment, but now, and I hope we'll get to talk about this more too, in terms of the framing of like, how do you take what you do into a company and make it relevant for them? And what I've realized more recently is really relevant and important to me is culture. And I'm feeling like what I can bring through play and through values really has to relate to culture, and that's something that companies do value. So that's been a really cool thing for me to look back on my past and realize, oh, I've been doing culture work for a long time, but I just didn't think of it that way. If I put it in a corporate context, it totally makes sense. And so the next outcropping of that is a conference that I'm producing next year called the Culture Conference.
Nice.
It's going to be for business leaders who want to do the personal growth work of figuring out the kind of leader they need to be to have the culture they want to have, and then getting the business skills and the acumen to actually implement that culture in their own companies and teams. So that's a fun, exciting project that is kind of catalyzing everything else to a higher level.
Beautiful. Well, I can't wait to hear more about that. What is your estimated timeline on that, or do you have a date?
Yeah, April 1st and 2nd, 2017. It'll be here in the Bay Area.
Wonderful. Cool. Well, I'd love to hear you say a little bit more about the trajectory there. So acro yoga, culture, how does all of that fit together for you, and what's coming forward in terms of culture as being this primary thread of your work?
Yeah. So acro yoga was a practice that I devoted myself to for 10 years, established it in 2003, traveled around the world. For me, it was really about the body and movement as a metaphor for trust, connection, relationship, community, connection. And over 10 years, it was a lot of doing the physical practice and people being really excited about the physical practice. And for me, after 10 years, I realized that I wasn't really excited about acrobatics and yoga anymore, but I was still really excited about the essence and the meaning behind it. And I found that I wanted to bring that essence out to more people who wouldn't necessarily ever walk into a yoga studio or would be terrified to do handstands. And I'm like, I know that everyone yearns for this feeling of connection and community. And how can I use embodiment and use movement as a vehicle to bring that to people in a way that's much more pedestrian and much more accessible and a lot less scary? So that was a lot of the transition out of acro yoga and into this new body of work to say, one of the main principles of acro yoga was playfulness. And in the years since I've left, really sat with like, what is important to me? What is the core of what I'm about? And I've oscillated between a couple different things, and I kept coming back to play. And I was like, I think that actually is something I'm really passionate about and something I really stand for, and something that differentiates my offering from a lot of other offerings, is that I believe that lightness and fun and laughter are actually incredibly deep transformational tools if used properly and if given the appropriate time to like reflect and integrate. And they just break down barriers very quickly. So it's probably the most prized tool in my tool bag is playfulness. And the beauty of play is that it usually involves other people. So it's interactive by nature, collaborative by nature. And it's also usually it's in the present and it's in the body. Right? It's like we don't necessarily, there's some kinds of ways of play that you could like do a crossword puzzle, and that's a certain form of play. But what I'm talking about is much more immersive, engaging, interactive, embodied ways that we learn to collaborate and innovate and explore together.
I love your story. I love you so much. You know that already, but one of the things I really relate to in that is this idea of I had this experience through my physical body. I'm a mover. I'm a person who's doing this work this way. And yet there's this essence that I want to make available to other people who might not walk into the yoga studio or who might never want to dance because dance is such an interesting and edgy frontier for some folks. Say a little bit more about how you help people make that translation from what they got when they came to a yoga class or an acro yoga class to what they could get in a much more subtle way, let's say in a context that is a non-traditional context for that kind of work.
Totally. Well, I'll just give an example because it popped as soon as you started talking. I was doing an event at Singularity University, which is on the NASA campus here in the Bay Area. It's very kind of like heady and intellectual scientists, like global leaders who want to make changes to affect over 1 billion people on the planet. So this is like very high goals, very high stakes. And I was going in and doing a program with them. And part of what I did with them at a certain point is we do this mirroring exercise where I put on music and I literally just have them face each other. And, you know, as I move this hand, you move this hand. And so as if there's a mirror between us. Very simple, right? Very rudimentary. But with the appropriate, I think I put on some like Bollywood music, right? So it gives it this feeling of like fun and silly. And so they were encouraged to kind of like, this is not about looking good. This is about having fun. And part of what I think really inhibits people from movement or dancing is that fear of judgment. Mm-hmm. They judge themselves. They judge other people. They're afraid other people are judging them. So how do you create a circumstance where people feel safe? And so it's a matter of giving enough structure so that people can lean into it and be like, oh, everyone's doing this. It's not just me. I'm not the only one being vulnerable. Everyone's being vulnerable. And if you add that layer of silly or play, then it makes it a lot less serious. It makes it lighter. I've also seen it work really well where you ask people to dance like a 3-year-old, and somehow invoking the child also just helps people lose their inhibitions. And so anyway, in this event at Singularity, we did this mirroring exercise and it moved into something else. And then maybe a few minutes later, I had them just dance around the room until they found a new seat. So it was kind of like musical chairs in a way. And it was like really awesome. I put on another fun song. Everyone danced around. At the end of the event, I was in the bathroom and this woman came up to me and we were just talking and she was like, you know, she's like, I never think of myself as a dancer. I never dance in public. I don't dance in front of other people. But the way that all unfolded, I didn't even realize I was dancing until afterwards and how comfortable that was for me. And she's like, and now I actually feel like I might go out and dance in public and like that could be a fun thing. And for me, that was one of the most meaningful pieces of feedback I could get because I remember being in that place, even though I grew up dancing. In my 20s when I was in college, I remember feeling self-conscious about dancing in front of other people, like free dancing, like I was taking jazz and ballet and tap and all those things, but to just free-form dance was very vulnerable. And I remember clearly a specific night in college, like making the decision with my roommate, we were just like hanging out in our room, that I was going to allow myself to dance freely in front of other people. And it set me on a different trajectory. So if I can help inspire that kind of permission and freedom for other people, I just think the quality of your life gets better. You know, you get to be a more fully expressed person. I think that's a great gift.
Amen, sister. And I have a really similar moment in my own story, just going, oh yeah, I wasn't going to, and then I opened it up and all these things came out that weren't necessarily present before. I feel like that's really common actually for people to have some version of a story of, at some point I stopped doing this thing that was really natural. And then, you know, fast forward, I have this unexpected situation that I'm in where I'm called upon or triggered or invited to do something different, and suddenly I find that again, which feels like great medicine. And what do you see? So those of us who do this work see this all the time, but when you go into the business context, what do you see becomes possible then for these people that's not possible for them before, that's useful from a business perspective?
I think there's a lot less of like posturing or like trying to be something. I'm not trying to maintain some composure idea facade. It's like, oh, you're human, I'm human. We can actually just relate to each other. I can let my guard down. And I think, especially like I've had one woman who was in a workshop and I had them do some like silly exercise and then they had to create a performance out of it. And she was like, afterwards, she said, I feel very comfortable on stage and as a speaker, and I feel like a strong woman and I can be vulnerable in front of people, but being silly or playful in front of people, that felt really scary.
Mm.
And the thing is, like, when you take any quality of being and you say, that's not okay to show people, then you're limiting your power of expression. You're limiting your ability to relate to people, to be empathic, to give yourself permission to be all of you and give them permission to be all of themselves. So when you put that back in your tool bag and you're like, oh, now I can be silly, now I can be playful, now I can be vulnerable, now I can be expressed. I think when you work together with someone, you see more of their humanity. And it's less of a me versus you or us versus them, and more of like, oh, we're in it together. So I think the level of collaboration, the level of creativity, the level of innovation goes up, because we start to, I always say, like, play dissolves the crystallization of the mind. So the mind gets in these certain patterns, right? And then it's black and white, it's this or that. And it has ways in which it travels. And when you play and you move, literally through the physical body, you are breaking down those rigid patterns and you're opening up new possibilities. So I think that people definitely have an experience of like, oh, there's not one way, there's many ways.
That is a very good description of culture change. I think it's, I tend to see over and over that people say, well, we want to make this different way of being in our organization happen, but we're not sure how to do it. And people are stuck. And it's like, you're just offering this antidote through play or through movement or through these other avenues. And I think that's really an interesting frame on those of us who do this work, bringing it into companies. Like, where can the value actually lie? Well, it shakes something up and they're wanting that. They just don't know how to do it. And maybe they didn't know this was part of the potential solution.
Right, totally.
So when you made this transition somewhat recently from being global founder of Acro Yoga to Play on Purpose, Awesome Diva, how did you know that the business world was the right place for you to bring your work next? What inspired you about that or excited you about that?
That's a good question. I think it felt like the right thing. When you make a transition, oftentimes in life, very often our pendulum swings from one extreme to the other. So going from being barefoot in stretchy clothes in yoga studios with fairly like nomadic, adventurous, traveler, kind of like stereotypical hippie, not everyone is like a hippie type who's into yoga, but that kind of a vibe. Like, I think there was something as I exited that world that was yearning for something very different.
Uh-huh.
And so that was probably the other extreme of what I could envision. And there was something that I really liked about the challenge. I realized that about myself, that I like to be a pioneer. I like to create a path where there is no path, or where there's a very small, indiscreet path. Like, I really like to break open new paradigms, ways of being. And I like to be a bridge. So I like to help people get exposure to new things. There's something I think very fulfilling and satisfying. Even though, I taught Acro Yoga for 10 years, and some of the basic postures and practices I taught thousands and thousands and thousands of times. Every time I saw someone have a breakthrough and they were like, wow, I never thought I could do this. Or, wow, I'm having this experience with this person that I never thought was possible within an hour. That was fulfilling and satisfying to me. So there's something that I really love about that, like, first aha moment where you can see someone's brain explode and you just open a whole new world of possibility to them. Like, I just think that's phenomenal. So going into the business environment, I was like, I know it's going to be a challenge. I know I'm going to have to prove on some level why play is important. What is the ROI on play? How to make that valuable and applicable in a business context. But I also knew that the satisfaction and the fulfillment of being able to reach those people and give them exposure to something they may not ever seek themselves or may not ever have access to would be fulfilling enough that it would make that process worthwhile.
So it was hard work and it was worth it, it sounds like.
Yes, it's still hard work.
It has been hard work, and it has been worth it, and it continues.
Still a process, and it's still unfolding, and I'm still figuring it out. But I am grateful to say, like, I do live in the San Francisco Bay Area, where I feel like if there's any place where it's going to be a ripe environment to do this work and to establish this, I think I feel very lucky to be in a place where there are a lot of open-minded people and companies who are willing to try new things. And I think that more and more, people are realizing, like, this separation of work and play, and the separation of who I am at work versus who I am in my personal life is not working. Like, there needs to be more integration of my joy, my passion, my purpose, and my work, and also like authentically who I am as a person, and like not just seeing my colleagues as assets or challenges, but seeing them as people with feelings and families and hobbies, and someone that I can learn and grow with.
Totally. And living on the other side of the country, I have lots of thoughts about how ripe the Bay Area is and how great it is if you who are watching happen to be in that part of the world. And if you're not, I have other thoughts about what might be challenging or interesting about that as well. So more on that later.
Definitely think it can happen anywhere, and there are some environments that are more conducive than others. So
totally. And then starting the movement, it's good to start in the place where all of the people are like, that could be cool, you know, or something like that. Maybe it's not quite like that. In that, I'm actually curious, and I think many of us who are watching will be as well. How did you go about getting your first gig? And let's say, what about how you went about it actually worked that you would replicate if you had to do it again?
Right. Okay. So I had a couple different gigs that happened that were more like through friends, where I was saying, hey, I'm trying out this stuff. Can I do it for free in exchange for your feedback and a testimonial? So without counting those, like the actual first paid gig I got kind of happened roundabout. I did an event called Acro Yoga for Entrepreneurs. So it was taking the thing that I'm known and credible for. People were like, oh, Acro Yoga, that's cool. I know what it is. It's established. It's a thing. And then combining it with business. So it was a way of bridging both worlds. So I did Acro Yoga for Entrepreneurs. So it was basically using Acro Yoga as a metaphor for the entrepreneurial journey, about trusting the unknown, about collaborating with others, about taking risks. So it's just giving people that kind of deeper insight into what it is to be an entrepreneur through this practice. And it was an invite only kind of thing. Like, I really went through my list and I sent out individualized invitations to each person and why I thought they should come. And I probably invited, I don't know, 100 people. And I had friends who also invited certain folks on my behalf. And they knew that the idea was to help me launch Plan Purpose, to say like, this is the vibe of what I'm going for. And so the idea was to bring in people from companies that might be good allies, either directly or indirectly, because I think you never know exactly how it's going to work out. And so at the event, I talked a little bit about Plan Purpose. And at the end, I raffled off a free coaching session with me, like a free one-on-one session with me, and a free group Plan Purpose session for a group, or like a group of friends or a team. And I ended up, the woman who won the group raffle, she was the VP of marketing at a pharmaceutical company.
Nice.
And so I was like, hey, you won the thing. And she's like, oh, great. Because, you know, in this company, we have 2 companies that were recently acquired and we're merging them together, and this team that needs to come together. And there's been these challenges. And I think this session would be great. And let's do it next month. And I was like, okay, great. Like, it was kind of one of those like amazing, awesome. And so when I was talking to her and when I was doing the strategy call to figure out actually what we would do and what they needed, she had some pretty lofty goals of what she wanted to achieve in the session. And the raffle was for a free 1 hour. So I was like, listen, I want to be honest with you that for what you're wanting to achieve, I don't feel confident that I can do that for you in an hour. I'd really need like an hour and a half or 2 hours. And she said, well, I don't want the 1 hour raffle to like stop us from doing the work that we need to do. So let's just book 2 hours and I'll pay you for the extra hour. And I was like, okay. She's like, I was like, all right. So what was funny about it was that I didn't host that event to sell. I hosted the event to share what I was doing and what I was up to. And the raffle was a way for me to gain more experience and more deeply engage with the people who were there. And then it was also interesting just to see who put their card in for the 1 hour versus the group, because I said you could only do one. So that's another way in which I could have like followed up more with people to say, oh, I'm sorry you didn't win the raffle, but I could offer you this session at this rate, or what's your interest in? So I think, so that was an interesting roundabout way that the first thing happened. And I think when you're doing something, especially in the beginning, for me, what I found works is, you know, really leverage the network you already have. Because it's really hard to go in cold to a company that has no idea who you are, your character, your experience, anything, and sell them on something that's already edgy. So I think it really helps to have a champion, a supporter on the inside who knows you, knows your character, knows your work, and is willing to advocate for you. I think makes a huge difference. And what I'm finding is that this kind of work is almost not 100%, but maybe 90% referral based. So the more that you actually know people and the more that they know what you're doing and the more that you can give them an actual visceral experience of your work. Because with the kind of stuff we do, it's like you can talk about it and explain it to people and they're still not going to get it. Like they're going to get an idea, but it's not the same as being in the room with you. So how can you create kind of low risk, low overhead ways of exposing people to actually the practice of what you're offering so that they can, from their own experience, represent you within their organizations? I think that was a huge takeaway for me.
I love that. And if I think about the work I've done in the last year, I would say definitely have had really similar experiences in terms of if somebody already knows you, if they've had a taste of it, if they've gotten to experience it in some way, that can open this whole other conversation. Whereas otherwise it's, not that I haven't sold to companies that haven't experienced me, but those were much, much longer kind of trust building or building conversations, especially if it was a higher ticket item. Whereas if it's, I've tasted it, great, I can see what I can do with this. I have a visceral sense of how this could be useful. And then you really get to kind of play and create together in that exploratory conversation.
Totally. Yeah, it's just a lot easier, smoother, faster when you already know someone. And even if, you're a dance teacher and you're like, oh, I want to go into corporate, but like, I don't have any corporate connections. I imagine if you really sit down and look through your Facebook friends, look through your LinkedIn profile, look through all the names on your cell phone, you will find a handful of people that are working in those contexts. And maybe they're not the best point person. Maybe they're not the decision maker, but they could put you in touch with that person. Yeah. So I really think it's just like, it's really starting from where you are and leveraging, because all you need is like one testimonial, one reference to get yourself going.
Love it. And right now, so you've been doing the work for a while, you're still building the work and you're figuring it out along the way, as the rest of us are. When you think about, let's say when you think about program design, so you get that first gig, and this would be relevant for anyone who's watching, who's, wanting to build something internally as well. Like, how do you think about what you do in that hour or that 2 hours? What do you take into account and what's most important as you're building the curriculum?
Well, I often do, I'll do a strategy call with a client. So usually something like an hour, 45 minutes, an hour, just to find out more about what's important to them. So one of the questions that I really love to ask is if this event were to go incredibly well, what would that look like and feel like for you afterwards? What would people be saying? What would the feeling be? What would the outcome be of that? And that really, I always think about reverse engineering an event. So you start from the goal and the outcome that the client wants. And then you say, okay, how do I build a curriculum that in each moment is supremely designed to deliver that outcome? And so I think it's about you really have to be strategic, and especially when you're presenting play or dance or alternative modes that are not automatically deemed as credible or valuable. It's on us even more so as practitioners, consultants, to show that value and to be incredibly intentional with how we do what we do to deliver that outcome. So depending on what the outcome is, I'll create a different series of events. But one of the things the first thing for me in any group is to create safety. That's it. If people don't feel safe, they ain't doing nothing. Yeah, they might do some things, but they'll do it reticently, and they're only going to do a little bit, right? They're not going to give themselves permission to be free or be vulnerable or take a risk if they don't feel safe. So that for me is always primary, is creating safety in the room and also creating connection in the room. So how can you create an atmosphere where people feel that they have more in common than not, where they're like, oh, I feel the humanity in you, I feel the humanity in me, I feel the sameness in us, and therefore I can let my guard down because I don't have to be afraid of this other. And sometimes in a corporate environment, that's leveling out the hierarchy, or that's, dispelling some tensions that exist between departments or whatever's kind of going on. So safety, connection, and then I think you can actually move people into more of a progressive curriculum that's oriented towards the goal that the client has.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We're so excited to be learning from your wisdom and your experience. And I really love the way you think about these things. It gives me lots more ideas and just more excitement about the work. Just to kind of move towards closing, a couple of thoughts. So one, if let's say I'm internal to a company and I'm thinking about bringing something like this in, what advice would you have for me in terms of why bother or why this would be useful?
I think oftentimes, when you're inside of an organization, it's a whole ecosystem. It's a dynamic, living, breathing ecosystem. Sometimes, like for fish and water, we can't see the water because it's where we live. And when you bring in an external person, there's risk to that. But the benefit to that is that we oftentimes can see the things that you on the inside can't see because we've got this other perspective. So I think there can be something valuable, especially if you're feeling stuck or confused, or like, I want this and I think I'm doing all the things that should make this happen and yet it's not happening. What's going on? That's a great moment to bring in someone from the outside and just be like, okay, well, have you thought about this? Have you asked this question? Have you talked to this person? Have you tried this approach? What's going on here? So oftentimes also as a consultant, we can come in and do interviews across different departments or different levels of the company to kind of get a more holistic perspective of what's going on. And oftentimes people will open up to you as an external person more than someone who's internal, especially if there's like a power dynamic and they're like, oh, you're my boss, and I'm afraid to tell you something that might get me fired. So I think oftentimes it's a great way to get an objective, quote unquote, objective perspective sometimes. And I think a lot of what's happening in the workplace today is the desire for innovation. And so it's this idea of like, how do we not only keep up, but how do we get ahead? And so I think the organizations that are afraid of change and are holding back and holding on to what was, they're in danger because things are moving so fast these days. And the organizations that are embracing change and saying like, okay, we need to be adaptable, we need to be resilient, and we need to give our people the tools to have training for the unexpected and to be able to have that stress of that not actually divide people, but actually bring them together and help them rise to the challenge. So I think that's another big piece. And then the other thing is like, people need to have fun. Like, it's really important. And if you have a fun, playful environment and a culture where people enjoy being at work and they enjoy who they're working with, it's going to be a lot easier for you to like attract and retain the best people because they want to be there. And there's all these studies that show that, people are far more interested in culture than perks and payment at a certain point. Like, they want to feel good. They want to be part of something cool, something fun. So, as I think work and life continue to blend, people don't want to just go somewhere to make money. They want to go somewhere to provide meaning and to create friendships and to have fun.
True in the Silicon Valley and true in 100-year-old banks on the East Coast. Again, amen. Thank you. And for those of us who may be watching who are wanting to do more of this work or just get started doing this work, what advice would you have for someone who's just on the verge of wanting to bring this work into the business space?
Yeah, I would say, kind of going back to before, like, start with where you are, leverage the network you already have. Make it really easy for someone to say yes. And you may have to figure out what that is. Like, I thought it would be really easy for people to say yes to me doing a free 1-hour event with their team on site. And even that, I found there were some challenges because people had to like clear the space and get everyone's, it's an interesting thing to figure out, is it an external? For me, it was a combination of external workshop where I'm inviting people and they're coming individually, or going into the company and doing it there. And there were challenges with both, and there were benefits of both. So I think it's looking for, when you have a couple people that you trust, you can feel like you can really be like, hey, I'm really wanting to offer this from your perspective on the inside. If you could just do a handful of informational interviews even and say like, if I was to bring dance into a company like yours, what would be the easiest way for me to do that, where it would be really, easy for you to say yes? What kind of format, what kind of timing, what kind of experience, and where would the value be for you in that? And just really use their words their languaging and their ideas, because oftentimes we spend a lot of time making marketing copy and developing programs that we think are great, but actually don't fit with the need of the client. So the more that you can just be curious, be inquisitive, get a handful of people on the phone who might be people you'd want to work with or companies you'd want to work for, and just get them to give you their insight. And you'll find, I think people are often really responsive to helping somebody out. And especially when you're asking someone for advice and wisdom, that makes people feel really good. And they want to help you. So that would be one of the first things I would do, to just give yourself a sense of like, what's the easiest path in? And for the first handful of things, just give it away, because the experience is most important. You're going to get your feedback, you're going to get testimonials. Once you have those, then you can start charging money and creating websites and programs. But in the beginning, I think the experience and just getting in the door is the most important thing.
Thank you. And a lot of those are strategies that we're going to be talking about on the upcoming courses and webinars. So you've set us up very well. Thank you. And, you know, just to really echo the, if you will, the idea of asking and really listening. I think so many of us have tools, we have superpowers, we have things that we know that we're good at, but we don't necessarily already know the needs of the audience. And so being able to ask, to inquire, to try things on, to not create the website until it's done, very, very much in alignment with the way I think about this work as well. Mm-hmm. If we want to track you, Jenny, how can we find you? What are the best places to follow your work?
Good question. Right now, you can find me at playonpurpose.com. And you can also find me at my name, jennysauerklein.com. Those are both two good places to catch me.
Wonderful.
And thecultureconference.com will be coming shortly, and it's not up yet because I'm still developing it.
Cool. We'll be looking for that as
well. Website, but it will be there.
And tell us one more time the dates on that.
April 1st and 2nd, 2017.
Thecultureconference.com when it's available. And we will be sending that in your info links and things when we send out the video to the audience. So you should have a way to get a hold of or track Jenny as well when you see or receive this video. And I'll just say to our audience, thank you again for spending this time with us. If you want to learn more about how to teach dance in business, meaning all that stuff that Jenny suggested doing there at the end and more, how do you actually get in the door? Who are the people? How do you build the program? You can track us down, follow us on Facebook at The Corporate Dance Maven. And we're also live at thecorporatedancemaven.com and have some webinars and courses coming up in the next couple of weeks. Thank you again, Jenny. It's been a pleasure, and we'll see you again soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Leanne. Thanks for having me.